So let the left side of this rubber band represent God's vision for your life. The other end, the right side, represents current reality. This is where you are right now, today. Your current reality. So confession time. How many of you would say that there's at least a little bit of gap between your current reality and what God's vision is for your life? Just raise your hands. All right? Okay. I think all the honest people have their hands up on that one. Now, how many of you would say you're doing pretty well, but the person next to you has a huge gap that you're concerned about? Well, it's precisely this gap between current reality and God's vision for our lives that we're going to talk about. It's that gap that produces this tension in our lives that makes it difficult for us to grow. Because we feel pulled in two directions simultaneously, and tension always cries out to be resolved. Tension always wants to be released. And in this instance, the tension can only be released in one of two ways. The first way is that I can lower God's vision for my life and let it slide backwards toward my current reality. I can lower God's vision for my life. I can lower my aspirations. I can learn to settle for mediocrity. And if I do that, I'm going to engage in certain strategies. For instance, I'll start comparing myself to people I think are worse than me. I'll avoid self-examination. I'll get distracted by money, or pleasure, or alcohol, or busyness, or television, or the internet, or whatever. I'll avoid accountability. I'll avoid authentic relationships with other human beings. I'll hide. I'll get used to sin. I will get used to sin. That's what happens if we release the tension by going this way. Because there's only two ways in this scenario to release the tension. And that's the one. And the other one is that we move from our current reality and take steps toward God's vision for our lives. That's another way to release the tension. Is that we, over time, take steps to become more and more like Jesus Christ, who is the head. Two ways to release the tension. So the question then is, which direction will I go? Which direction will you go? You've got this tension when it comes to growth. You can only go this way, or you can go this way. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. And a lot of which direction you go depends on, do I keep God's vision for my life always in front of me? I mean, when I'm here on Sunday mornings, it's pretty easy to think about spiritual things. It's pretty easy to think about the things that really matter in life, because there aren't a lot of distractions, and you come here and you expect to talk about that. But we go out into the world and there are a lot of distractions, and we get busy, and we get tired, and we get alone, and suddenly this vision isn't in front of us anymore. So number one, we've got to keep that vision ever before us. And number two, and this is where things like home groups come in handy, and services like this, we need to understand more what God's vision is for us exactly. We need to seek to understand that more and more, so that over time this becomes more compelling for us. So that eventually we come to the point of saying, I want this more than I want anything else. I want this more than I want anything else. Now, if you hold on to God's vision, that's going to produce tension, isn't it? Energy is going to be pulling you this way. And that energy is the Holy Spirit. And we tend to think of tension as a bad thing, but in this instance, that tension is a good thing. The Holy Spirit draws us toward God's vision for our lives. Now, of course, if a rubber band is too loose, there's no energy, there's no tension whatsoever. This here is a picture of apathy. This is a picture of spiritual complacency. One writer that I consulted recently said, spiritual drift. This is spiritual drift. And when this is happening in your life, it's never the Holy Spirit. Because the Holy Spirit is not about apathy at all. The Holy Spirit is about drawing us toward that vision that God has for us, drawing us toward the life that Jesus lived and the life that He calls for us. Now, on the flip side, if there's too much tension, right, like if you're just like reefing on this and pulling it as far as it'll go, what's going to happen? It's going to snap, right? And someone might get hurt. And spiritually speaking, this snapping happens when we try to live with tension at both ends. I really want God's vision for my life. I really, really do. But I really like my own agenda as well. I really like life as is being lived right now. And so you're going to have this tension between what you think you want and the changes you don't want to make and what God is drawing us to. And eventually, if you keep that up, you're going to snap. And sometimes we see this at River City Church. Someone from the community will find us, and they'll come here, and they'll start growing. And they're enthused about what they're learning and about what they're experiencing. And we're all excited because we're a church family. Not just a church, we're a church family. And we get excited. And then suddenly, without a word to anyone, we never see that person anymore. And those of us left behind are left wondering, like, what happened? Like, was it my deodorant? Seriously, I wonder, did I say something? Why did they disappear? And the answer is they snapped. Oftentimes, it's because they snapped. They were trying to live with this tension, and they'd come here and they'd hear God drawing them in this direction, and they'd go away home and they'd say, no, I want to stay over here. And something happens. Now, rest assured, whenever the energy is positive, when it's that draw in this direction, it's the Holy Spirit. And that's why Paul says things like this in Philippians. Philippians 2, verses 12 and 13. Paul says, work out your salvation. In other words, keep moving toward God's vision for your life. Keep taking steps toward becoming like His Son, Jesus. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is who? God who works in you to will and to act according to His good pleasure. Who does the work? God. And it's the Holy Spirit that Paul's talking about that's drawing us in this direction. The Holy Spirit plays a role in our being conformed or becoming more and more like the image of Jesus Christ. But then my question, and maybe some of you are asking it as well, is that it? Because if it's just me and the Holy Spirit drawing me in this direction, that's not a lot. Really, that's two things. It's not a lot, especially when you consider all the distractions that we have in life, the myriad of things vying for our attention and saying we need to be over here. The things that make it easy to stay the same as we were last year or 5 years ago. Strictly speaking of myself here, of Daryl, if it's just those two things, me plus the Holy Spirit, that are going to get me in this direction, then my chance of achieving God's vision for my life are about as good as a snowball's chance in Houston. All right? Because I've tried it, and it doesn't work. I've tried it. So let's go back to our passage in Ephesians chapter 4. Our main passage today. And I'm just going to start one verse earlier and read one verse further, and you can follow along on the screen. Then we will no longer be immature like children, right? Children are going to grow up physically, and we hope, and we guide them to grow in every other way as well. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We won't be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ. He, that is Jesus, makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. A lot of emphasis on grow there, isn't there? And that's the theme of today's talk, connected. We are connected in community like this to grow. And that's the third resource that's available to us. We can grow by putting our minds to it and staying focused on desiring to grow. We can grow if we invite the Holy Spirit into our hearts and our lives. Then we have divine power drawing us toward that growth. But a third resource that the Bible highlights for us is this community of Christians, fellow believers, friends, who are also there to be part of encouraging us and walking along with us in this growth. And in this passage, the church, River City Church for our purposes, is compared to a human body. And Jesus Christ is the head, right? That makes sense. And we're all united beneath Him. And each of us is a part of this body. Each of us is an important part of this body. Some of us are fingers. Some of us are toes. I'll leave it at that.